The phone call comes at 2:47 a.m. on a Wednesday, jolting me from the deepest sleep I've had in months. The shrill ring cuts through my Phoenix apartment like a siren, and for a moment I'm 12 years old again, heart pounding with that familiar dread that something terrible has happened. Riley? My mother's voice sounds strained, unfamiliar. We need to talk. Can you come home this weekend? I sit up in bed, switching on the lamp. The sudden brightness makes me squint, but not as much as the confusion in my mother's tone. Home means Flagstaff, a 3-hour drive through desert highways I've avoided for the past 2 years. What's wrong, Mom? Is someone hurt? A pause that stretches too long. It's about your father and what you've been saying about him. The words hit like ice water. I haven't spoken to my parents since Christmas dinner 2021, when I finally found the courage to tell them the truth about what Dad had done to me throughout my childhood. The conversation had ended with me leaving their house in tears, while my mother accused me of seeking attention, and my father sat in his recliner, denying everything with the same calm voice he'd used when threatening me as a child. Riley, are you there? I'm here. My voice comes out steadier than I feel. What about Dad? He's been. There have been some developments. Other people are making similar claims. We need to discuss this as a family before things get out of hand. Other people? My stomach drops as the implications settle in. I've wondered for years if I was the only one, hoped and feared in equal measure that my father's abuse had begun and ended with me. The possibility that there might be other victims has haunted my therapy sessions for months. Who? I ask, but the line has gone quiet except for my mother's breathing. Not over the phone. Can you be here Saturday morning, 10 a.m.? I want to say no. Every instinct screams at me to protect the fragile peace I've built in Phoenix. Working as a graphic designer for a small marketing firm, living in my studio apartment with my rescue cat, Charlie, attending Dr. Martinez's therapy sessions twice a week. It's taken me 3 years to sleep through the night without nightmares, to stop checking locks obsessively, to trust that the world isn't entirely populated by people who want to hurt me. But something in my mother's voice, a crack in her usual certainty, makes me hesitate. I'll be there, I hear myself saying. Saturday morning arrives gray and cold, unusual for Arizona in October. I drive through Flagstaff's familiar streets with sweaty palms gripping the steering wheel, past the elementary school where I first learned to hide bruises under long sleeves, past the park where Dad used to take me for special talks that left me silent and shaking. The house looks smaller than I remember, the blue siding faded and the front porch sagging slightly. Mom's prized rose garden has been neglected, brown stems reaching toward a sky that promises snow. I sit in my car for 5 minutes, breathing exercises Dr. Martinez taught me, before finding the courage to walk up the cracked concrete path. Mama opens the door before I knock. She's aged dramatically in the 2 years since I've seen her, gray streaking through her auburn hair, new lines etched around her eyes. We stare at each other for a moment, neither sure how to bridge the chasm that opened between us. Riley, she steps aside to let me in. Thank you for coming. The living room feels like a museum of my childhood. Everything exactly as I left it. Dad's leather recliner still dominates the corner, the coffee table still bears water rings from countless beer bottles, and the family photos on the mantle still show the lie we presented to the world. Happy family, devoted father, normal childhood. Dad emerges from the kitchen, and I instinctively step backward. He looks older, too. His once thick hair now thin and white, but his eyes hold that same cold calculation I remember. When he speaks, his voice carries that familiar undercurrent of controlled anger. So you came. Good. We need to clear this up. Clear what up? I ask, though my voice comes out smaller than intended. Mom gestures towards the couch, but I remain standing. She settles into her usual spot, the corner closest to Dad's chair, and folds her hands in her lap. The gesture is so familiar, it makes my chest tight.
There's been a situation, she begins carefully. Your cousin Amanda has made some accusations. Similar to yours.
Amanda, my father's brother's daughter, 2 years younger than me. We'd been close as children until I was around 10 and she was 8, when family gatherings became exercises in silent terror for me. I'd wondered why she started avoiding our grandfather's basement during holiday parties, why she stopped wanting to stay overnight when her parents visited. What kind of accusations? I ask, though I already know. Dad's hands clench into fists. The same lies you've been spreading, claiming things that never happened, trying to destroy this family's reputation. The denial is so automatic, so practiced, that it takes me back to being 13 years old, standing in this same room while he explained to my mother that my bruises came from falling off my bike, that my nightmares were just an overactive imagination, that my sudden fear of being alone with him was a phase. "They're not lies," I say quietly. "Riley," Mom's voice carries a warning, "we've been through this. Your father would never." "He did." The words come out stronger now. "And if Amanda is saying the same things, maybe you should consider that we're telling the truth." Dad's hands stand up abruptly, his chair creaking. Even at 62, he's still imposing, 6 feet tall with broad shoulders that once made me feel safe and now make me want to run. "I've never laid a hand on either of you girls inappropriately. This is some kind of conspiracy, maybe something you two cooked up together." The accusation is so absurd, it would be laughable if it weren't so destructive. Amanda and I haven't spoken in over 5 years. Not since her wedding, where I had a panic attack during the father-daughter dance and had to leave early. "When did she come forward?" I ask Mom, ignoring Dad's glare. "Last month. She went to the police in Tucson. They've opened an investigation." The room goes silent, except for the tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway, the same clock that used to mark the hours I spent hiding in my bedroom, waiting for Dad's footsteps in the hallway. An investigation means interviews, statements, possibly charges. It means our family's carefully constructed facade crumbling in the most public way possible. "Good," I say, and mean it. Dad's face flushes red. "Good? You think it's good that your cousin is destroying this family with her lies?" "She's not lying. Neither was I. And maybe if you'd listened to me 2 years ago instead of calling me delusional, we could have dealt with this privately." "There's nothing to deal with," he snaps, "because nothing happened." But something in his voice wavers, just slightly. For the first time since I walked into this house, I see a crack in his certainty. Fear, maybe, or the recognition that his carefully constructed denials might not be enough anymore. Mom looks between us, her face pale. "The police want to talk to you too, Riley. They called yesterday." My heart pounds so hard I can hear it in my ears. I've imagined this moment for years. Official validation, someone in authority taking my claims seriously. But now that it's here, it feels overwhelming. "Detective Morrison from Flagstaff PD," Mom continues. "She said she'd like to interview you about your experiences. She mentioned that you might have documentation." Documentation? Dr. Martinez's files. 2.5 years of therapy sessions where I've slowly, painfully reconstructed the memories I spent decades trying to forget. Detailed notes about trauma responses, PTSD symptoms, the specific ways childhood sexual abuse manifests in adult behavior patterns. Dad goes very still. "What documentation?" "Therapy records. Detailed accounts of everything you did to me, professional assessments of my trauma responses, medical documentation of the psychological damage." "That's privileged information," he says quickly. "They can't use that." But even as he speaks, I can see the wheels turning behind his eyes. He's calculating, planning, trying to figure out how to discredit evidence he can't control or manipulate. Mom wraps her arms around herself. "Riley, surely you wouldn't... airing our private family business in court. This isn't a private family business, Mom. This is criminal behavior. And if Amanda is brave enough to come forward, then yes, I'll do whatever it takes to support her case. The words feel powerful coming out of my mouth, more powerful than I felt in years. For so long, I carried the weight of his abuse alone, convinced by his manipulations that I was crazy, that my memories were unreliable, that no one would believe me anyway. Dad moves toward me, and I automatically step back, my body remembering danger even when my mind tries to stay calm. You need to think very carefully about what you're doing here, Riley. False accusations can destroy lives. So can sexual abuse.
A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The standoff stretches between us. Years of silence and denial finally cracking open. Outside, I hear a car door slam, and Mom glances toward the window nervously. "That's your Uncle Thomas," she says. I asked him to come. And Amanda. My stomach drops. I haven't seen my uncle or Amanda since the wedding 5 years ago. The idea of facing them in this room, with Dad's denials hanging in the air and Mom's desperate need to maintain normalcy, feels like walking into a trap. Why would you do that without telling me? "Because this affects the whole family," Dad says, his voice regaining its authoritative edge. "If you two girls are going to destroy everything we've built with these fantasies, then we're going to hash it out right here, right now." The front door opens without a knock, the way a family does. Uncle Thomas appears first, his face grim and tired. Behind him comes Amanda, and I barely recognize her. The confident, vibrant woman from her wedding photos has been replaced by someone who looks haunted, diminished, like she's been carrying a weight too heavy for her frame. Our eyes meet across the room, and something passes between us. Recognition, maybe. Or the shared understanding that comes from surviving the same nightmare. "Hello, Riley," Thomas says carefully. "It's been a while." Amanda doesn't speak, just nods in my direction before taking a seat as far from Dad as possible. Her positioning tells me everything I need to know about her state of mind. "Now that we're all here," Dad begins, but Thomas cuts him off. "No, Paul. You don't get to control this conversation." His voice carries an authority I've never heard from my usually mild-mannered uncle. "My daughter came to me 3 weeks ago, crying, telling me things that made me sick to my stomach, things about you." Dad's composure slips further. "She's confused, Thomas. Maybe she's been talking to Riley, getting ideas." "She's not confused," Thomas's voice rises. "And the details she gave me? Jesus, Paul. The specific things, the places, the things you said to her. She was 8 years old." The room fills with horrible silence. Mom's face has gone white, and for the first time, I see doubt creeping into her expression. The doubt I've been hoping for, praying for years. Amanda finally speaks, her voice barely above a whisper. "The basement room at Grandma's house. During Christmas when I was 8, you told me it was a special game, that it would be our secret." I feel the blood drain from my face. The basement room. I remember that room. Remember Dad leading me down those same stairs when I was 7, telling me the same lies about special games and secrets. And the shed behind Uncle Mark's house during the family reunion when I was 9. You said no one would believe me if I told, that it would ruin the family. Each detail hits like a physical blow. Different locations, but the same methods, the same manipulations, the same calculated predation. I look at Dad and see him not just as the man who hurt me, but as someone who spent years systematically abusing children in our family. "How many others?" I ask, the question coming out raw and desperate. Thomas closes his eyes. "We don't know yet, but the detective mentioned there might be more." More victims, more children who suffered in silence while our family celebrated holidays and birthdays and graduations, never knowing that the man they trusted, the man they called father and uncle and grandfather, was destroying lives in calculated increments. Mom starts crying, quiet tears that seem to come from somewhere deep and broken. "This can't be real, Paul. Tell them this isn't real." But Dad has gone silent, his face a mask of cold fury. The denials have stopped, replaced by something more dangerous: calculation. And I realize that this conversation, this confrontation I thought might bring justice, has just painted targets on Amanda's back and mine. Because now he knows exactly what we remember, exactly what we're prepared to testify to. And men like my father don't give up their carefully constructed lives without a fight. The drive back to Phoenix feels endless. Every mile of desert highway gives me more time to process what just happened. And by the time I reach my apartment, my hands are shaking so badly I can barely turn the key in the lock. Charlie greets me at the door with concerned meowing, sensing my distress the way animals do. I collapse onto my couch, pulling him onto my lap, and finally let myself fall apart. The tears come in waves, washing away years of carefully maintained composure. My phone buzzes. A text from Amanda. "Can we talk away from them?" I stare at the message for 10 minutes before responding. "Coffee tomorrow, Flagstaff?"
Yes, Macy's on Route 66, 2 p.m. That night, I barely sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I see Dad's face when the denial stopped working. That cold calculation replacing his practiced innocence. I've seen that look before, usually right before he found new ways to ensure my silence. Monday morning arrives gray and cold. I call in sick to work, something I never do, and make the drive back to Flagstaff. The coffee shop sits in an old building downtown. Brick walls and worn wooden floors that feel safer than my childhood home ever did. Amanda arrives first, choosing a corner table away from windows. When I walk in, she stands up quickly, and for a moment, we just stare at each other. Then she crosses the space between us and hugs me so tightly I can barely breathe. "I'm sorry," she whispers against my shoulder. "I'm so sorry. I didn't believe you before. I wasn't ready." We sit across from each other, hands wrapped around coffee cups like anchors. Amanda looks exhausted, dark circles under her eyes and a tremor in her hands that I recognize from my own reflection during the worst periods. "When did you remember?" I ask gently. She stares into her coffee. "It never completely went away. I just buried it. Told myself it was nightmares, imagination, anything but what it really was." She pauses, gathering strength. "But 3 months ago, my daughter Emma turned 8. My heart clenches. Emma, Amanda's beautiful little girl with her father's dark hair and Amanda's bright smile. I've seen photos on social media, carefully curated images of birthday parties and school events. She's the same age I was when it started," Amanda continues. "And one day she was playing in the backyard, just being a normal 8-year-old. And I looked at her and thought, God, I was so small, so innocent. And suddenly I couldn't pretend anymore that what happened to me was anything but rape." The word hangs between us, stark and undeniable. Neither of us had used it yesterday, dancing around it with euphemisms and careful language. But that's what it was. Rape. Multiple times, over years, perpetrated by someone who was supposed to protect us. How many times? I ask, though I'm not sure I want to know. She closes her eyes. "Jesus, Riley, 6 years?" He got better at it as I got older, more manipulative. By the time I was 10, he didn't need to use force. He'd convinced me that it was normal, that all fathers did this with their daughters, that it would devastate Mom if she found out. The psychological manipulation was almost worse than the physical abuse. Amanda agrees. The way he made us complicit in our own victimization. We sit in silence for a moment, the weight of shared understanding settling between us. Around us, the coffee shop bustles with normal Monday afternoon activity: students studying, business people taking calls, elderly couples sharing newspapers. The normalcy feels surreal against the darkness we're discussing. "Tell me about the investigation," I say. Amanda pulls a manila folder from her purse. "Detective Morrison gave me copies of everything so far. She's been incredibly thorough." She slides papers across the table. Police reports, interview transcripts, a timeline that makes my stomach turn. According to the documents, the investigation began when Amanda's therapist in Tucson filed a mandatory report after Amanda disclosed the abuse during a session. "I didn't know she was going to do that," Amanda explains. "I thought therapy was confidential." "It is, unless there's imminent danger to a child or if the perpetrator has access to other potential victims." I scanned the timeline. Detective Morrison had interviewed Amanda 3 times, each session revealing additional details. She had also spoken to Amanda's husband, her parents, and Uncle Thomas. But what catches my attention is a note at the bottom: additional potential victims identified through family interviews. "Who else?" I ask, pointing to the note. Amanda's face goes pale. "Sarah. Sarah. Our cousin from Dad's other brother's family, currently 15 years old." The realization hits like a physical blow. "She's still a minor," I whisper. Detective Morrison interviewed her last week, with her parents present, of course. Sarah broke down and admitted that Uncle Paula had been inappropriate with her during the last family reunion.
I think back to last summer's reunion, the one I skipped because being around Dad for a weekend felt impossible. Sarah had been there, bright and bubbly and 14 years old, the same age I was when Dad's abuse escalated to its worst point. Is she safe now? Her parents have cut off all contact with our side of the family. They're furious that no one warned them, that they let their daughter around him for years without knowing. The guilt hits immediately. I could have warned them. If I'd been braver, if I'd pushed harder when my parents dismissed my claims, Sarah might have been protected. "This isn't your fault," Amanda says, reading my expression. "The only person responsible for his actions is him." But the guilt doesn't lift. 3 victims that we know of, possibly more. How many family gatherings, holidays, casual visits had provided him with opportunities? How many times had relatives praised him as such a devoted father and uncle, while he was systematically destroying the children in his care? "Detective Morrison wants to interview you this week," Amanda continues. "She specifically mentioned your therapy records. Dr. Martinez warned me this might happen. She said therapeutic records can be powerful evidence in criminal cases because they show consistent disclosure patterns and documented trauma responses. Are you ready for that? Having your private sessions exposed in court?" The question stops me cold. 2.5 years of therapy sessions contain my most vulnerable moments. The breakthrough when I first remembered the basement incident, the panic attacks when discussing Dad's manipulation tactics, the slowly dawning realization of how the abuse shaped every relationship I've ever had. I don't know if anyone's ever ready for that, I answer honestly, but if it helps convict him, if it protects other kids, then yes. Amanda reaches across the table and squeezes my hand. "We're going to do this together, whatever happens." "What about the family? Uncle Thomas seemed supportive yesterday, but what about your parents? Mine?" Her expression darkens. "Mom and Dad are struggling. They want to believe me, but they also can't accept that they left me alone with him so many times. The guilt is eating them alive." She pauses. "Your parents are a different story." "Meaning?" "Uncle Thomas said your dad called him Saturday night. Threatened him, actually. Said that if this goes to trial, he'll destroy our family's reputation and make sure everyone knows we're liars and attention seekers." The threat doesn't surprise me, but it still sends a chill down my spine. Dad has always been strategic about maintaining his image, cultivating relationships with people who matter in the community. He volunteers at the local food bank, serves on the church board, coaches Little League Baseball. The idea that such an upstanding citizen could be a predator challenges people's fundamental beliefs about how evil manifests in the world. He's going to fight this hard, I realize aloud. Detective Morrison warned me about that. She said cases like this often get ugly because perpetrators have spent decades building reputations that serve as armor against accusations. I think about Dad's position in the community, his network of friends and colleagues who would find our allegations incomprehensible. Men like him don't survive for decades by being careless. They survive by being methodical, manipulative, and utterly convincing in their denials. There's something else, Amanda says, lowering her voice. Detective Morrison asked if I knew about other families, neighbors, family friends, anyone who might have left their children in his care. The implications of that question settle like lead in my stomach. Dad didn't just have access to family members. For years, he was the trusted uncle, the reliable neighbor, the helpful church member who would babysit in a pinch. The Hendersons, I say suddenly. They lived next door when I was little. Mrs. Henderson used to ask Dad to watch Kelly when she had to work late. Kelly Henderson? She's about your age, right? 2 years younger. We were friends until middle school, then she changed, became withdrawn, started having behavioral problems. Amanda writes the name in her notebook. Anyone else? I forced myself to think systematically about Dad's sphere of influence over the years. The church youth group. He helped with camping trips and overnight events, and he taught Sunday school for the younger kids for about 5 years. Each name I remember feels like another weight on my chest. How many children had been left in his care by trusting parents who saw only his public persona? How many had suffered in silence, carrying shame and trauma they couldn't name or understand?
We need to give these names to Detective Morrison, Amanda says. Even if nothing happened, she needs to investigate. What if we're wrong? What if we're destroying innocent people's lives with suspicions? Riley, look at me. Amanda's voice is firm. We're not wrong about what happened to us, and predators don't typically limit themselves to family members. If we can prevent even one more child from going through what we did, then we have to speak up. She's right, and I know it. But the weight of potentially destroying more lives, of turning our private nightmare into a public scandal that could affect dozens of people, feels overwhelming. Detective Morrison said the investigation could take months, Amanda continues. She's being thorough because she knows cases like this live or die on evidence and credibility. She can't afford to miss anything. What happens to Dad in the meantime? He's been advised not to have unsupervised contact with minors. It's not an official restriction yet, but Detective Morrison made it clear that violating that guideline would look very bad if charges are filed. I imagine Dad receiving that warning, his carefully controlled fury at having his access to potential victims restricted. For a man who spent decades operating in the shadows, having official attention on his behavior must feel like a spotlight he can't escape. He's going to try to discredit us, I say. Find ways to make us look unreliable or vindictive. Let him try. Amanda's voice carries a strength I haven't heard from her before. I've spent 15 years in therapy dealing with the aftermath of what he did. I have medical records, documented PTSD, a trail of evidence showing how his abuse affected every aspect of my life. If he wants to claim I'm lying for attention, he'll have to explain why I'd fabricate something that's caused me decades of pain. Looking at my cousin across the coffee shop table, I see something I haven't seen since we were children. Hope. Not the naive hope of childhood, but the hard-won hope of someone who survived hell and decided to fight back. Okay, I say, let's do this. Let's make sure he never hurts another child. As we gather our papers and prepare to leave, Amanda turns to me one more time. Riley, thank you for speaking up 2 years ago. Even though they didn't believe you then, you planted a seed. You made it possible for me to come forward now. The words hit harder than I expected. For 2 years, I've carried the weight of my family's rejection, convinced that speaking up had been pointless, destructive, naive. But Amanda was right. My truth, however badly received, had created a crack in the family's facade, and now that crack was widening into something that might finally bring justice. Outside the coffee shop, we hug goodbye with the understanding that everything changes from this moment forward. We're no longer isolated victims carrying shame and silence. We're witnesses preparing to testify, survivors ready to seek justice, women who refuse to let one man's evil continue unchecked. The drive back to Phoenix feels different this time. The desert landscape looks cleaner somehow, the sky broader. For the first time in years, I'm not running from my past. I'm preparing to confront it in court. Tuesday morning brings a call I've been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. Detective Morrison's voice carries the professional warmth of someone who's delivered difficult news countless times. Miss Chen, I'd like to schedule your interview for this Friday at 2 p.m. We'll meet at the Flagstaff Police Department, and you're welcome to bring an attorney if you choose. An attorney? The suggestion hadn't occurred to me, but it makes sense. This isn't just about telling my story anymore. It's about building a criminal case that could send my father to prison for decades. I'll be there, I tell her. And, Detective, Amanda mentioned you wanted my therapy records. Only if you're comfortable providing them. They're not required, but they could be valuable corroborating evidence. Your therapist would need to sign a release. After hanging up, I sit in my Phoenix apartment, staring at Dr. Martinez's business card. Calling her means crossing a line I can't uncross, turning my private healing journey into public evidence. But it also means giving my words the weight of professional documentation. I dial before I can change my mind. Riley? Dr. Martinez sounds surprised. It's not your usual appointment day. I need to talk to you about releasing my files to the police. The silence stretches for several seconds. I see. Can you come in this afternoon? This conversation needs to happen in person.
Dr. Martinez's office has been my sanctuary for over 2 years. The soft gray walls, the carefully chosen artwork, the tissues always within reach, everything designed to create safety for people like me who carry invisible wounds. Today, it feels different, more clinical, like I'm seeing it through the eyes of strangers who will judge the validity of my trauma.
Tell me what's happening, Dr. Martinez says, settling into her familiar chair across from me. I explain everything: Amanda's report, the investigation, Sarah's disclosure, the upcoming interview. Dr. Martinez listens without interruption, occasionally making notes in the leather portfolio she keeps for sessions. I need you to understand what you're agreeing to, she says when I finish. If we release your files, everything becomes public record if this goes to trial. Every breakthrough, every setback, every detail you've shared about your trauma and recovery. Everything? Everything. The court will see your progress notes from when you first started therapy and could barely say his name out loud. They'll read about your panic attacks, your relationship difficulties, your struggles with intimacy and trust. The defense attorney will scrutinize every word, looking for inconsistencies or evidence that your memories are unreliable. Reality hits like cold water. My most vulnerable moments dissected by strangers who want to prove I'm lying. My coping mechanisms are analyzed for signs of instability. My healing journey weaponizes me. But, Dr. Martinez continues, your files also contain something powerful: consistent disclosure patterns that match clinical indicators of childhood sexual abuse, detailed documentation of trauma responses that would be nearly impossible to fabricate, professional assessments that support your credibility. What do you think I should do? I think, she says carefully, that you're the only person who can make that decision. But I want you to consider this. Predators rely on their victims' shame and silence. Every time a survivor chooses to speak publicly, it challenges that power.
I close my eyes, thinking about Sarah at 15, still a child, having to tell her story to investigators, about other potential victims who might never come forward if this case fails, about the 8-year-old girl I was who deserved protection and justice. I want to release them, all of them. Dr. Martinez nods slowly. Then we'll need to prepare you for what comes next. Defense attorneys in cases like this often try to paint victims as mentally unstable or attention-seeking. They'll examine your therapy records for any evidence of depression, anxiety, or relationship problems, and argue that these issues caused false memories rather than resulted from trauma. How do we counter that? With facts. Your initial disclosures were consistent with clinical presentations of childhood sexual abuse. Your symptoms followed predictable patterns. Most importantly, you've never wavered in your core allegations, even during periods of doubt about other details. We spend the next hour reviewing my files, Dr. Martinez explaining how each entry supports rather than undermine my credibility. The panic attack I had during our 6th session when discussing my father wasn't evidence of instability, it was a normal trauma response. My difficulty maintaining relationships wasn't proof of underlying mental illness, it was a documented consequence of childhood sexual abuse. There's something else you should know, Dr. Martinez says as our session nears an end. I've been contacted by attorneys representing your father. My blood runs cold. What kind of contact? They requested information about your treatment, claiming they need it for his defense. I refused, of course, but it tells us they're already building their strategy around discrediting your mental health. The thought of my father's lawyers probing into my therapy makes my skin crawl. But it also clarifies something important. He's not planning to admit guilt and seek a plea deal. He's preparing for a fight. Thursday evening, I drive to Flagstaff and check into a motel near the police station. I want to be close for tomorrow's interview, but I can't bear the thought of staying at my parents' house. Mom has called 3 times since Monday, each conversation more strained than the last. Your father made mistakes, maybe, but destroying the family won't change the past. Mistakes. As if systematic sexual abuse of children could be categorized alongside forgetting to pay a bill or missing a birthday. The minimization in her voice told me everything I needed to know about where her loyalties lay. Friday morning arrives clear and cold. I dress carefully in a navy blazer and plaques, Dr. Martinez's advice echoing in my mind. Appearance matters. You want to look credible, stable, professional. The Flagstaff Police Department sits in a modern building that contrasts sharply with the historic downtown area. Detective Morrison meets me in the lobby, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a firm handshake. Thank you for coming, Riley. I know this isn't easy.
She leads me to an interview room equipped with recording equipment and a box of tissues. The institutional green walls remind me of my high school guidance counselor's office, where I once tried to hint at problems at home and was told that all teenagers have conflicts with their parents. Before we begin, Detective Morrison says, settling across from me with a thick file, I want you to know that we take these allegations very seriously. Our investigation has already uncovered evidence supporting both your cousin's claims and those of other potential victims. Other potential victims. How many others? I can't discuss details of ongoing investigations, but I can tell you that this appears to be a pattern of behavior spanning decades. The confirmation hits me like validation and horror combined. Validation that we're not crazy, not making things up, not misremembering childhood confusion. Horror at the scope of my father's predation. Are you ready to begin? I nod, and Detective Morrison starts the recording equipment. The red light blinks steadily as she states the date, time, and participants for the record. Riley, I'd like you to tell me about your relationship with your father, starting from your earliest memories. The next 3 hours pass in a blur of careful questioning and painful recollection. Detective Morrison guides me through each incident chronologically, asking for specific details about locations, timing, what was said, what happened next. She's thorough without being aggressive, professional without being cold. When I describe the basement room at my grandmother's house, she shows me photographs from the crime scene investigation. Seeing that familiar space through the lens of law enforcement, evidence markers, measurement scales, clinical documentation, transforms it from a place of personal nightmare into potential legal proof. Your cousin describes similar incidents in this same location, Detective Morrison notes. The physical evidence supports both accounts. What kind of physical evidence? I can't go into specifics, but our forensics team found indicators consistent with the activities you've both described. Your father had regular access to the space, and we've documented multiple opportunities for the incidents you've reported. The interview concludes with Detective Morrison explaining next steps. My formal statement will be transcribed and reviewed. The therapy records I've agreed to release will be analyzed by forensic psychologists. The district attorney's office will evaluate whether there's sufficient evidence to file charges. How long before you know, I ask? These cases take time to build properly. We're likely looking at several more months of investigation. But Riley, I want you to know that your courage in coming forward has been instrumental in protecting other potential victims. Walking out of the police station, I feel simultaneously drained and empowered. For the first time in my life, someone in authority has listened to my story and believed it. Someone with the power to seek justice has taken my trauma seriously. My phone buzzes with a text from Amanda. How did it go? Hard but good. One step closer to justice. That evening, I called Dr. Martinez from my motel room. I did it. I told them everything. How do you feel? Terrified, relieved, angry, hopeful? I paused, trying to find words for the complex emotions swirling through me. For the first time, I feel like I'm fighting back instead of just surviving. That's exactly what you're doing, Riley. You're refusing to let his actions define your life anymore. As I prepare for bed in the sterile motel room, I think about the 8-year-old girl who first walked into that basement, trusting and innocent. She couldn't fight back then. She couldn't protect herself or seek justice. But I can fight for her now, and I will. 3 weeks after my police interview, the first bomb drops via registered letter delivered to my Phoenix apartment. Inside, legal letterhead from Garrett and Associates announces that I'm being sued for defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and conspiracy to commit fraud. My father is suing me for $500,000. I sit on my couch reading the complaint with shaking hands. According to the lawsuit, I've orchestrated a malicious campaign of false allegations designed to destroy an innocent man's reputation and extort money from the family. The language is clinical, devastating, and completely fictional.
But what terrifies me more than the lawsuit itself is how quickly it arrived. Dad filed this complaint within days of learning about my police interview, which means he's been preparing for legal warfare since the investigation began. My phone rings immediately. Amanda, her voice tight with panic. Did you get served too? You're being sued? Same amount, same allegations. Riley, how is this possible? We're the victims here. I scan through the legal papers again, looking for answers I don't understand. He's trying to scare us into backing down, make the cost of speaking up higher than the cost of staying silent. It's working. My husband is furious. He says we can't afford to fight this, that we should consider settling just to make it go away. The thought of settling, of paying my abuser to keep quiet about his crimes, makes me physically ill. But I also understand the financial reality. Legal defense costs could bankrupt both our families, even if we ultimately win. We need lawyers, I say. Real ones. That evening, I called Janet Rodriguez, an attorney Dr. Martinez recommended who specializes in defending abuse survivors against retaliatory lawsuits. Her voice carries the confidence of someone who's fought these battles before. SLAPP suits, she explains. Strategic lawsuits against public participation. They're designed to intimidate and silence victims through the threat of expensive litigation. Can he actually win? Unlikely, but that's not the point. The process is the punishment. He's betting that the cost and stress of defending yourself will force you to recant your allegations. So what do we do?
We fight back. Arizona has strong anti-SLAPP protections for people speaking about matters of public concern. Child abuse allegations definitely qualify. 2 days later, Janet files a motion to dismiss Dad's lawsuit and a countersuit seeking attorney's fees and damages for frivolous litigation. But the legal maneuvering is just the beginning. On Thursday morning, I wake to find my car vandalized. Someone has keyed "liar" across the driver's side door and slashed 2 tires. The message is clear. The campaign to silence me has escalated beyond courtrooms. Detective Morrison takes the report personally, photographing the damage and dusting for fingerprints. Has anyone made direct threats against you? Not exactly, but my mother called yesterday. She said the family is disappointed in my choices and that I should think carefully about the consequences of destroying innocent people. That could be interpreted as intimidation. I'll make a note in the case file. But the harassment isn't limited to vandalism. My workplace receives an anonymous call claiming I'm mentally unstable and dangerous to clients. My landlord gets a complaint about suspicious activity in my apartment. Someone creates a fake social media profile using my photo and posts bizarre, rambling messages designed to make me look unhinged. Each incident is carefully crafted to seem plausibly unrelated to the abuse case, but the pattern is unmistakable. Dad is using his network of family and friends to wage psychological warfare against his accusers. The breaking point comes on a Saturday afternoon when I'm grocery shopping. I'm comparing pasta prices when a woman approaches me in the aisle. She's around my mother's age, well-dressed, with the kind of controlled anger that feels dangerous. She says, "You should be ashamed of yourself," loud enough to attract attention from other shoppers. "Paul Chen is a good man, a pillar of this community. How dare you try to destroy him with your lies?" I recognize her as Mrs. Patterson from my parents' church, someone who's known Dad for decades. Her public confrontation draws stares and whispers from other customers, exactly the kind of scene designed to humiliate and isolate me. "You don't know what you're talking about," I manage, but my voice sounds weak even to me. "You are a troubled young woman looking for attention when I see one. Your poor parents having to deal with this nonsense on top of everything else." She walks away, leaving me standing in the pasta aisle, fighting back tears, while strangers whisper and stare. The message is clear. Dad's supporters will make every public space in Flagstaff hostile territory for me. That evening, Amanda calls with similar stories. Her children have been approached at school by other kids asking if their mother is the lady who lies about her uncle. Her husband's business has lost 2 clients who cited concerns about family stability.
This is getting out of hand, Amanda says. Maybe we should, don't you dare suggest backing down, I interrupt. This is exactly what he wants. He's trying to make the cost of truth higher than the cost of silence. But even as I say the words, doubt creeps in. Are we strong enough to withstand this campaign? Is seeking justice worth destroying our entire lives? The answer comes Monday morning in a call from Detective Morrison that changes everything. "Riley, we've made an arrest." My heart stops. "Dad?" "Kelly Henderson came forward yesterday. She's prepared to testify that your father sexually abused her repeatedly when she was 9 and 10 years old." Kelly Henderson, the neighbor girl I'd worried about, the one whose behavioral changes in middle school had seemed so familiar. She's 31 now, married with children of her own, and she's ready to speak. "That's not all," Detective Morrison continues. "Her testimony led us to 2 other potential victims, women who babysat for church families your father knew. The pattern is becoming undeniable. 5 victims, 5 women spanning 2 decades, all with similar stories of manipulation, abuse, and enforced silence. The scope of Dad's predation is staggering, but it also means our case is no longer isolated allegations that can be dismissed as family drama. When will charges be filed? The district attorney is reviewing the evidence this week. Given the number of victims and the strength of the testimony, I expect formal charges within days. After hanging up, I sit in stunned silence.
For weeks, I've been fighting a defensive battle against lawsuits and harassment, but now the tables are turning. Dad is about to become a criminal defendant, not just a civil plaintiff. The irony isn't lost on me. While he was suing us for defamation, investigators were building a case that proves everything we said was true. While his supporters were calling us liars, more victims were finding the courage to come forward. I call Amanda immediately. Kelly Henderson confirmed everything. There are at least 5 victims now. The sob of relief that comes through the phone says everything. Thank God, I was starting to think, I know, but we were right to speak up. We were right to fight back. That afternoon, I drive through Flagstaff with a strange sense of vindication. The same streets where I'd been confronted and harassed now feel different. Dad's carefully constructed reputation is about to crumble, and his network of supporters will have to confront the reality that they've been defending a predator. But I'm not naive enough to think the battle is over. Criminal charges will only intensify his desperation, and desperate men do dangerous things. The harassment campaign that started with vandalism and social isolation could escalate to direct threats or violence. As evening approaches, I make a decision that would have seemed impossible just months ago. I'm not going to hide anymore. I'm not going to let fear dictate my choices or allow shame to silence my voice. Dad spent decades counting on our silence, our isolation, our willingness to bear the cost of his crimes alone. But he miscalculated. He created too many victims, hurt too many children, and relied too heavily on a community that would eventually choose justice over loyalty. The little girl who was once powerless in that basement is gone. In her place stands a woman who refuses to be silenced, intimidated, or defeated. And she's about to watch her abuser face the consequences of his choices. The call comes at 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday, shattering my sleep with the jarring persistence that only an emergency brings. I fumble for my phone in the darkness, heart already racing with the primal fear that late-night calls trigger. Riley? Amanda's voice sounds hollow, distant. Someone broke into my house. I bolt upright, instantly awake. Are you okay? Are the kids? We're safe. We weren't home. But Riley... Her voice cracks. They destroyed everything. My therapy files, my computer, photo albums from when we were kids. They were looking for something specific. I'm already pulling on clothes, my mind racing through implications. The criminal charges against Dad were filed yesterday morning. His mugshot made the local news. His mugshot broadcast across Flagstaff alongside descriptions of the allegations. This break-in is no coincidence. I'm driving up now. Have you called the police? They're here. Detective Morrison is on her way. Riley, there's something else. They left a message. My blood turns to ice. What kind of message?
Spray painted on my bedroom wall. Drop the charges or next time you'll be home. The drive to Flagstaff passes in a blur of desert highway and mounting dread. By the time I reach Amanda's subdivision, police cars line the street, their red and blue lights painting the darkness in ominous colors. Crime scene tape blocks the driveway, and investigators move through the house like ghosts cataloging destruction. Amanda sits in a police cruiser, wrapped in a blanket despite the warm Arizona night. Her children are with her husband's parents, safely away from the chaos. When she sees me, her composed facade finally crumbles. They knew exactly where to look, she sobs against my shoulder. My filing cabinet was forced open, specific documents missing. They took my therapy records, my journal from when I first started remembering. It's like they had a map of what to destroy. Detective Morrison approaches us, her expression grim. This was professionally done. No fingerprints, no DNA evidence left behind, security cameras disabled before entry. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. You think it was Dad? I ask, though we all know the answer. Your father is currently in custody, so he didn't do this personally, but the timing and specificity suggest coordination. She pauses, choosing her words carefully. Riley, I need to ask, are your therapy records stored at home? The question hits like a physical blow. If they targeted Amanda's files, mine would be next. Some of them, Dr. Martinez gave me copies for my own records. You need to secure them immediately and consider your personal safety.
This message wasn't subtle. 2 hours later, I'm standing in my Phoenix apartment, staring at my home office where months of carefully organized documentation live in filing cabinets and computer files. My therapy records, police statements, legal correspondence with Janet Rodriguez, everything that supports our case exists in this room. I start copying files to multiple thumb drives, my hands shaking as I work. Every sound from the hallway makes me freeze, listening for footsteps that might herald the same destruction Amanda faced. By dawn, I moved everything crucial to a safety deposit box at my bank. But the sense of violation lingers. Someone has been watching me closely enough to know my routines, my vulnerabilities, my sources of evidence. The crisis deepens when I arrive at work Thursday morning to find my boss, Margaret, waiting with human resources and a security guard. "Riley, we need to talk." Margaret's voice carries the formal tone that precedes termination. "We've received some concerning information about your involvement in a criminal matter." My stomach drops. What kind of information? HR pulls out a manila folder thick with documents. Anonymous tips claiming you've been dishonest about your mental health history, that you're facing criminal charges for making false police reports, that your presence creates liability issues for our clients. The lies are sophisticated, detailed enough to seem credible to people who don't know the full story. Someone has crafted a narrative that twists my victim status into criminal behavior, my therapy into evidence of instability. None of that is true, I say, but the words feel inadequate against the weight of official-looking documentation. "We understand this is a difficult situation," HR continues, "but we can't ignore the potential impact on our business." I clean up my desk under the security guard's watchful eye, 23 colleagues avoiding eye contact as I pack 3 years of my professional life into cardboard boxes. The isolation is devastating, transforming my workplace from a sanctuary to a crime scene. But the worst is yet to come. Friday afternoon brings a call from Dr. Martinez that changes everything. Her voice carries an urgency I've never heard before. "Riley, you need to get down here immediately. My office was burglarized last night." "Your therapy files?" "Gone. All of them. But that's not the worst part." She pauses, and I can hear papers rustling in the background. "The burglars didn't just take your records. They took everything I had on a dozen other patients, including several other abuse survivors."
The scope of the attack becomes clear. This isn't just about silencing Amanda and me. Someone is systematically destroying evidence that could support any victim of sexual abuse, creating a pattern of burglary that makes our specific targeting less obvious. How is that possible? Don't you have backup systems? Digital files were corrupted with malware, paper files physically removed. This was sophisticated, Riley. Whoever did this had inside knowledge of my security systems and filing methods. The implications are staggering. Without therapy records, our credibility takes a massive hit. Defense attorneys will argue that convenient burglaries prove we're fabricating evidence, that the missing files contained information damaging to our case. But Dr. Martinez has more devastating news. There's something else. I received a call this morning from the state licensing board. Someone filed a complaint claiming I've been coaching patients to create false memories of abuse for financial gain. That's insane! It's also effective. The board is opening an investigation, which means I can't testify in your case until it's resolved, and that process could take years. The systematic destruction of our case is breathtaking in its scope. In less than a week, we've lost critical evidence, financial stability, and our primary expert witness. Dad's legal team isn't just defending him. They're waging total warfare against the concept that his victims deserve justice. That evening, Amanda calls with the final blow. "My husband wants me to drop the charges." "What?" "He says it's not worth destroying our family, that the kids can't handle the stress of a prolonged trial. He's talking about moving out of state, starting over somewhere else." I understand his position, but the thought of Dad escaping consequences because we were broken by the process makes me physically ill. Amanda, if we stop now, he wins, and he'll know exactly how to defeat the next victims who try to come forward. I know. But Riley, I can't lose my marriage over this. I can't put my children through years of harassment and threats.
The conversation ends with both of us in tears, the alliance that sustained us through months of investigation cracking under pressure no family should have to endure. Alone in my apartment that night, I inventory the wreckage of my life. I'm unemployed, isolated from family, threatened by strangers, and losing my primary ally in seeking justice. The 8-year-old girl who was abused in that basement is watching her adult self fail to achieve the justice she deserved. But as I sit in the darkness, something hardens inside me. Dad has spent 40 years perfecting the art of silencing his victims through fear, manipulation, and systematic destruction of their credibility. He's turned these tactics into a science, probably refined through decades of similar attacks on other women who dared to speak. The realization that I'm not his first victim to face this treatment fills me with rage that burns brighter than fear. He's done this before. Destroyed evidence, pressured families, turned communities against accusers. He's probably succeeded before, leaving other women broken and defeated. But he's miscalculated this time. Every escalation, every attack, every attempt to destroy my life creates more evidence of his desperation. Men who are truly innocent don't wage psychological warfare against their accusers. They don't coordinate sophisticated burglaries or orchestrate character assassination campaigns. His very efforts to silence me prove that everything we've said is true. And tomorrow, I'm going to make sure the world knows it. Monday morning, I wake up with crystal clarity about what needs to happen next. The systematic destruction of our case wasn't random chaos. It was a carefully orchestrated campaign that left digital fingerprints and human witnesses. Dad's desperation has made him sloppy, and now it's time to turn his weapons against him. I called Janet Rodriguez at 8 a.m. sharp. I need to file a federal lawsuit, I tell her. Civil rights violations, witness intimidation, obstruction of justice, everything they've done to silence us. Riley, that's a massive undertaking. Federal court is expensive and they made it federal when they crossed state lines to coordinate these attacks. And I'm not worried about money anymore because I'm about to prove that every action they've taken is evidence of guilt. Janet's silence stretches for several seconds. When she speaks again, her voice carries new respect. What do you have in mind?
I want to subpoena phone records, financial transactions, surveillance footage from every location that was burglarized. This wasn't amateur hour. Someone paid professionals to do this work, and professionals leave trails. By afternoon, we're sitting in Janet's conference room with 3 additional attorneys and a private investigator named Marcus Webb. Marcus specializes in tracking sophisticated criminal enterprises, and his initial assessment is encouraging. Your father's legal team made critical errors, he explains, spreading photos across the table. The burglary at Dr. Martinez's office disabled security cameras, but not the traffic cameras on the adjacent street. We have footage of the van used in the break-in. The photos show a white utility van parked outside Dr. Martinez's building at 2:47 a.m. The license plate is visible, and Marcus has already traced it to a rental company in Phoenix. The van was rented using a credit card belonging to someone named Derek Sullivan. He's a private investigator with a history of working corporate espionage cases. Guess who's been paying his bills for the past 2 months? He slides another document across the table. Financial records showing payments from Gerald Garrett, Dad's attorney, to Sullivan's investigation firm. The paper trail is undeniable. They hired professionals to destroy evidence in a criminal case? Janet says, her voice tight with controlled excitement. That's a federal felony. Multiple federal felonies. But Marcus has more. Sullivan made a mistake at your cousin's house. He used his personal cell phone to coordinate with the team, thinking he was safe because the call was encrypted. But encrypted calls still show up on cell tower records, and those records show his phone was at Amanda's address during the exact time of the burglary. The evidence is overwhelming, but I need something more immediate.
Can we use this to stop them from destroying additional evidence? Better than that, Janet says. We can get emergency injunctions against your father, his legal team, and anyone working with them, and we can demand the return of all stolen materials under penalty of contempt. Tuesday brings the first victory. Federal Judge Helen Morrison grants our emergency motion, issuing restraining orders that effectively freeze Dad's ability to continue his harassment campaign. More importantly, she orders the immediate return of all stolen documents and threatens criminal prosecution for anyone who destroyed evidence. The psychological impact is immediate. Dad's supporters, who thought they were helping defend an innocent man, suddenly realize they're potential federal defendants. The anonymous phone calls stop. The social media attacks disappear. The community pressure that made Flagstaff hostile territory evaporates overnight. But the real breakthrough comes Wednesday morning when Derek Sullivan's attorney calls Janet directly. My client wants to cooperate, he announces without preamble. Full immunity in exchange for testimony about who hired him and what he was instructed to do. Sullivan's cooperation opens a floodgate of evidence we never could have obtained otherwise. He provides audio recordings of his conversations with Gerald Garrett, detailed instructions about which documents to target, and financial records showing payments totaling over $75,000 for the harassment campaign. Most damaging of all, he reveals that this wasn't Dad's first time using these tactics. Sullivan's firm has been employed by Garrett's office to intimidate abuse victims in 3 other cases over the past 5 years. Your father has a playbook, Marcus explains as we review Sullivan's files. Steal therapy records, discredit expert witnesses, create financial pressure through job loss, isolate victims from support systems. He's been perfecting these methods for years. The discovery transforms our case from isolated criminal charges into evidence of a systematic conspiracy to obstruct justice. More importantly, it reveals the existence of other victims who were successfully silenced through identical methods. Thursday afternoon, Detective Morrison calls with news that changes everything. The federal investigation has uncovered evidence in 2 additional cases from 2018 and 2020. Women who filed police reports against men in prominent positions, then suddenly recanted after experiencing the same pattern of harassment you faced and Amanda. What happened to those cases? Charges were dropped when the victims withdrew their complaints, but now we know why they withdrew. They were terrorized into silence, using the exact same methods employed against you and Amanda. The revelation is devastating and vindicating in equal measure. Dad's legal strategy wasn't just about defending himself. It was about maintaining a system that ensures sexual predators can operate with impunity as long as they have enough money and connections to wage psychological warfare against their victims. But the tide has turned decisively. By Friday, 3 more women have contacted the district attorney's office, ready to testify about how Gerald Garrett's firm intimidated them into silence. The federal prosecutor's office announced they're opening a racketeering investigation into what they're calling a criminal enterprise designed to obstruct justice in sexual assault cases. The most satisfying moment comes when I receive a call from Margaret, my former boss.
Riley, we'd like you to consider returning to work. We've learned that the information we received about you was fabricated, and we want to make this right. The position has been filled, I lie smoothly. I'm consulting with federal prosecutors now. Much more interesting work. Amanda calls that evening with the news I've been hoping for. I told my husband I'm not dropping the charges. After seeing the evidence of what they did to other women, I can't live with myself if I let this continue. What changed his mind? The financial records. When he saw that your father spent $75,000 trying to silence us, he realized an innocent man doesn't wage that kind of war against his accusers. But the most unexpected support comes from an impossible source. Sunday afternoon, Uncle Thomas calls with information that stops my heart. Riley, your mother wants to meet with you, privately. She says she has something important to tell you about your father.
Mom wants to help us? She found something in his papers, documents he thought he'd hidden. She won't tell me what, but she says it proves everything you girls have been saying. The meeting is set for Tuesday at a neutral location, the public library in downtown Flagstaff. Mom arrives looking years older than when I last saw her, hollow-eyed and defeated. I found his journals, she says without preamble, sliding a manila envelope across the table, hidden in a safety deposit box I didn't know existed. He documented everything, Riley. Every victim, every method of silencing them, every payment to lawyers and investigators. My hands shake as I open the envelope. Inside are photocopies of handwritten pages in Dad's familiar script. Dates, names, detailed descriptions of abuse incidents written with the clinical detachment of someone cataloging inventory. But what makes me sick is the pride evident in his writing. He's not documenting crimes, he's celebrating conquests. Each successful intimidation campaign is described like a military victory. There are names in there I don't recognize, Mom. Children from the church, neighbors, family, friends, dozens of them over 40 years. The scope is staggering. Dad didn't just abuse his immediate family. He systematically targeted any child he could access, then refined methods for silencing them when they grew old enough to speak. Why are you showing me this now? I ask. Mom's composure finally cracks. Because I've spent 30 years making excuses for things I knew were wrong. Because I chose to protect a monster instead of protecting children. Because maybe if I help you now, I can prevent one more child from suffering. The journals provide the missing piece prosecutors needed to demonstrate Dad's systematic predation. More importantly, they contain detailed descriptions of his intimidation methods, proving that recent attacks on Amanda and me weren't desperate improvisation, they were standard operating procedure. Monday morning, I walk into the federal prosecutor's office carrying evidence that will ensure Dad never manipulates another victim into silence. For the first time in months, I'm not fighting to be believed. I'm fighting to ensure justice reaches every child whose name appears in those journals. And this time, I'm going to win. The federal courthouse in Phoenix buzzes with an energy I've never experienced. It's been 8 months since Mom handed me Dad's journals, 8 months of intensive investigation that transformed a local criminal case into a federal racketeering prosecution involving multiple states and dozens of victims. I sit in the front row of the gallery, flanked by Amanda and Kelly Henderson, watching as Dad enters the courtroom in an orange jumpsuit and shackles. The man who once dominated every room he entered now looks diminished, older, his carefully maintained facade stripped away by months of pre-trial detention. Behind us, the gallery fills with faces I recognize and some I don't. Other survivors who found courage to come forward once the conspiracy was exposed. Family members who chose truth over loyalty. Community leaders who realized they'd been defending a predator for decades. Federal prosecutor Linda Chen, no relation despite the shared surname, stands to address the jury for the final time. Her closing argument has been building for 3 weeks of testimony, but today she'll synthesize months of evidence into a narrative that leaves no room for doubt. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, she begins, her voice carrying the authority of someone who's prosecuted the worst criminals imaginable. This case is about more than one man's crimes against children. It's about a systematic enterprise designed to ensure that sexual predators can operate with impunity as long as they have the resources to terrorize their victims into silence.
The evidence she presents is overwhelming. Dad's journals, documenting 47 separate victims across 4 decades. Financial records showing over $300,000 spent on intimidation campaigns against survivors. Audio recordings of Gerald Garrett instructing Derek Sullivan on methods for destroying evidence and discrediting witnesses. But the most powerful testimony came from the survivors themselves. 16 women ranging in age from 22 to 58, each telling remarkably similar stories of abuse, followed by systematic intimidation when they tried to seek justice.
Sarah, now 18 and preparing for college, testified via video link about Dad's assault during the family reunion. Her parents sat in the gallery weeping as she described how family loyalty was weaponized to protect her abuser. Kelly Henderson, the neighbor girl whose behavioral changes I'd noticed decades ago, testified about years of abuse that began when she was 8 years old. Her testimony was particularly devastating because Dad's journals contained detailed descriptions of each incident, written with clinical detachment. The defendant didn't just abuse children, Prosecutor Chen continues. He studied the aftermath of his crimes, documenting which methods of intimidation were most effective at preventing disclosure. He turned the silencing of sexual abuse victims into a science. But perhaps the most damaging testimony came from Gerald Garrett himself, who accepted a plea deal in exchange for cooperation. The recording of his voice instructing Sullivan to destroy anything that makes these women look credible played in open court like a confession of conspiracy. Dr. Martinez, finally cleared by the state licensing board after their investigation proved the complaints against her were fabricated, testified about the sophisticated psychological warfare employed against abuse survivors. Her testimony helped the jury understand that the attacks on our credibility weren't random acts of desperation. They were calculated strategies refined through years of practice. This defendant created a system, Dr. Martinez had explained, designed to make seeking justice more traumatic than remaining silent. He weaponized the legal system, the mental health profession, and community relationships to ensure his victims would never be believed. The defense's case collapsed under the weight of evidence. Dad's attorney, a court-appointed lawyer after Gerald Garrett was disbarred and indicted, could only argue that the conspiracy charges were excessive, that Dad should be held responsible only for his direct actions, not the cover-up that followed. But the jury had seen too much evidence of systematic obstruction to accept that distinction. The recordings, the financial payments, the coordinated attacks on multiple victims across different cases, everything pointed to a man who had turned silencing abuse survivors into a criminal enterprise. Now, as Prosecutor Chen concludes her final argument, I see several jurors wiping away tears. The defendant didn't just abuse children, she says. He stole more than innocence from these children. He stole their voices, their credibility, their faith in justice itself. But today, you have the power to give those voices back, to declare that no amount of money, no network of enablers, no sophisticated intimidation campaign will protect predators from the consequences of their crimes. The jury deliberates for just under 4 hours. When they return, the foreman's voice is steady as he reads verdict after verdict, guilty on all counts. Racketeering, conspiracy to obstruct justice, witness intimidation, sexual abuse of minors, 23 separate felonies that will ensure Dad spends the rest of his life in federal prison. The sentencing hearing comes 6 weeks later. Federal Judge Patricia Wong listens to impact statements from 16 survivors, each woman reclaiming her voice in a way that would have been impossible under Dad's reign of terror. Amanda speaks about the years of therapy needed to undo the psychological damage, about teaching her children to recognize and report inappropriate touching because she knows predators often target multiple generations of the same family. Kelly Henderson reads a letter from her daughter, now 8 years old, the same age Kelly was when Dad's abuse began. My mummy is brave because she told the truth, even when bad people tried to scare her. When my turn comes, I stand at the podium looking directly at Dad for the first time since this ordeal began. He won't meet my eyes, but I don't need his acknowledgement anymore. Your Honor, I begin. For 40 years, this man operated on the assumption that children's voices don't matter, that survivors can be intimidated into silence, that money and influence can overcome truth. Today, we've proven him wrong. I talk about the 8-year-old girl who was taught that her body wasn't her own, who learned to dissociate during abuse to protect her mind. But I also talk about the adult woman who refused to let that child's suffering be meaningless, who chose to transform trauma into justice.
The conspiracy to silence us failed because truth has a power that can't be destroyed by burglary, discredited by lies, or intimidated by threats. Every survivor who testified in this case is living proof that justice delayed is not justice denied. It's justice that becomes more powerful with time. Judge Wong's sentence reflects the gravity of the crimes and the systematic nature of the cover-up. Life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. At 72, Dad will die behind bars, never again having access to potential victims. But the criminal case is only part of the resolution. The civil lawsuit against Dad's estate, Gerald Garrett's law firm, and Derek Sullivan's investigation company results in a $12 million settlement distributed among the survivors. More importantly, it establishes legal precedent for prosecuting intimidation campaigns against abuse survivors.
The Arizona State Bar creates new ethics rules specifically addressing attorney participation in witness intimidation. The state legislature passes Riley's Law, requiring mandatory reporting when law enforcement becomes aware of systematic efforts to silence abuse survivors. Dr. Martinez's practice not only survives the false accusations, but becomes a model for trauma-informed therapy that incorporates legal advocacy. She opens a foundation providing free counseling to abuse survivors navigating the legal system. 6 months after sentencing, I returned to Flagstaff for the first time as a truly free woman. The town looks different now, smaller, less threatening, like a place where ordinary people live ordinary lives, rather than a fortress protecting dark secrets. I visit Mom at the modest apartment she moved to after selling the family house. She's aged dramatically since Dad's arrest, but there's a peace in her face that I never saw during their marriage. I got a letter, she tells me, pulling an envelope from her kitchen table, from a woman in Colorado. She says her father was like yours, and that reading about our case gave her courage to contact the police. The letter describes systematic abuse and intimidation that mirrors Dad's methods exactly. But this time, there's an established legal framework for prosecuting not just the abuse, but the conspiracy to cover it up. There will be more letters, I tell Mom. More women finding their voices because we refuse to be silenced. That evening, Amanda and I meet for dinner at a restaurant overlooking the mountains that border Flagstaff. We're different people than we were 2 years ago. Stronger, more confident, no longer defined by what was done to us as children. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd stayed quiet? Amanda asks. I think about the 47 names in Dad's journals, the documented plans for silencing future victims, the network of enablers who facilitated decades of abuse. Dozens more children would have been hurt. Hundreds more survivors would have been intimidated into silence. So was it worth it? Everything we went through? I look out at the desert landscape where I spent my childhood, where I learned to fear my own father, where I eventually found the courage to speak truth that transformed not just my life, but created pathways for justice that didn't exist before. It was worth it, I say without hesitation, not just for us, but for every child who will grow up safer because predators now know they can't intimidate their way out of consequences. 3 years later, I work as a victim advocate with the Federal Prosecutor's Office, helping other survivors navigate the legal system. My Phoenix apartment has become a sanctuary, but not the kind built on isolation and fear. It's a sanctuary built on purpose, community, and the knowledge that speaking truth, no matter how difficult, can change the world. Charlie, now an elderly cat, still greets me at the door each evening. But these days he's often joined by other survivors who've become friends, advocates who've become family, and occasionally by Amanda's children who call me Aunt Riley and have no idea that their mother is a hero. The little girl who was once powerless in that basement is gone. In her place stands a woman who learned that justice isn't something granted by others, it's something you fight for, claim, and protect. A woman who discovered that the voices silenced in childhood can become the voices that change laws, prosecute criminals, and protect the next generation.
The therapist's records that went to court didn't just document my healing, they became evidence that healing is possible, that justice is achievable, and that truth, however long delayed, ultimately prevails. And every day as I help other survivors find their voices, I hear the echo of that 8-year-old girl who finally got the justice she deserved, not just for herself, but for every child who comes after her.
Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.